Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We are delighted to be bringing you this webinar on how to use our Groundwater Dependent Ecosystems Atlas. Welcome back to those who have tuned into a BOM webinar before. For those who are joining us for the first time, welcome. If you have missed our previous webinars and want to catch up, they are now available on demand from the Bureau's YouTube channel. My name is Caroline Andrzejewski, and I'm pleased to be your moderator today. Claire is our producer and will help moderate your questions. Hi Claire, how are you?
I'm well. How are you, Caroline?
I'm good, thank you. We have a high volume of attendees today, so we will address as many questions as we can. But before we start, may I have your attention please while we cover off on some housekeeping items. Our session today will run for 60 minutes with plenty of time allocated for questions. So please don't be shy. Send us your questions and share your insights via the chat function throughout the webinar. Note that this webinar is being recorded and the video will be shared with you via email, along with a PDF of the presentation. For first-time webinar attendees, please see some helpful tips on your screen. To ask a question or send feedback, please use the chat icon. Make sure you send it to all panelists and we will answer as many questions as possible during the allocated breaks. If we have any unanswered questions at the end, we will follow them up after the webinar. If you're experiencing audio issues at any time, try dialing in over the phone, or if you get disconnected for some reason, look for the WebEx icon in your toolbar or rejoin us again via the link. Finally, let me introduce today's speakers. Joining us in the webinar studio are Eloise Nation and Ben DiGregorio. Welcome to you both and thank you for being here. Hi guys, how are you?
Yeah, well, thanks for having us.
Yeah. Wow, pleasure. Eloise leads work on our Groundwater Dependent Ecosystems Atlas, or GDE Atlas, a comprehensive national inventory of ecosystems that depend on groundwater, and the topic of today's webinar. Eloise is currently working with state agencies to standardise GDE data across all states and update the Atlas with complementary data sets that will enrich the information you can extract. Ben is responsible for updating the GDE Atlas and also serves as the Secretariat of the GDE Reference Group. Prior to working at the Bureau, he has spent 10 years working for consulting companies in both Australia and England and has worked in many aspects of groundwater, including resource management, mining, environmental monitoring, and infrastructure projects. Ben, do you want to kick us off and run through the outline for today's webinar? What are you going to tell us about our Atlas?
Sure, I'd love to. Thank you, Caroline. So obviously I will be talking to you about GDEs today. A bit of an outline. I'll just give an introduction, just define what GDEs are, why they're important, and why we like them so much. Then my colleague Eloise, because you might get a bit sick of my voice, Eloise is going to talk to you about the GDE Atlas. She'll just give an overview of what it is, what's on there, and sort of, how the GDEs are mapped. And then I'll take it home with a bit of a case study. So before I jump into the introduction, I'm just going to do a bit of a pop quiz just to see what people think GDEs are. So the question is, which of the following iconic Australian landscapes are considered GDEs? The options are Kakadu National Park, B, Kadisanda Lake Eyre, C, Murray River, or D, all of the above. So I think has that appeared up for the participants now, I believe? Yes, so I expect this question might generate a little bit of controversy. It certainly generated some robust discussion around the office.
Really? Why?
Yeah. I guess there's a bit of a space where a bit of work's happening.
I think we've got a very clever audience, may I say, because everyone's going straight to the right answer.
Oh, okay.
We'll see how we go. We've had already a third of the audience answer, so they're doing really well.
So is it a controversy of how you define a GDE? Is that the controversy, or?
I think one of the options, some people in the office said it was, and some people said it wasn't.
So, and I'll touch on that when I sort of go through the answers.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think some people have slightly different ways of defining a GDA and that sort of thing. So yeah, a bit of toing and poing, but yeah.
That's good. We've
Yeah.
got more than 100 participants online. Thanks everyone for joining us, and more than half of our participants have voted. So make sure you get your votes in, and we will look at the results in a minute or two.
In a minute, yeah. While we're getting some results in, quick question from me: what is your favourite GDE, Ben?
My favourite. That's a very personal one. It depends how you like to define your favourite. I grew up going on camping holidays by the Ovens River in northeast Victoria. Got a camping there, so I've got a special place in my heart. Whether we're talking about importance or national significance, but I've just got a special place in my heart too. Yeah, that's my favourite one.
Eloise, how about you?
Yeah, it's a similar story for me. There's somewhere I used to go on holiday to in Queensland. It's called Innet Springs, and it's a place where there's a river, and hot spring water discharges into the river, so you can see the steam coming out.
Nice.
So it's quite spectacular, and you can really see that sort of interaction of groundwater and
the groundwater, and that sounds beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can we have another 30 seconds on the poll? We've had about 60% of people answer. So give us your answer real quick, and then we'll go through them, hey?
While we're waiting, although you'll probably cover this in the presentation, so I maybe shouldn't ask that one yet, but we'll leave that for later. So tell us a bit. Obviously, you've both got your favourite. Is that what inspired you to work in this area? What led you to work with groundwater?
So funnily enough, the Ovens River, it did inspire me to do my honours project in it. So I did an honours project where I was assessing groundwater surface water interaction in the Ovens River. I don't think I was really a hydrogeological nerd when I was a kid, but I certainly like playing in it, and I do have a love of nature, so I guess I was kind of always destined to go in the environmental space in some capacity. Eloise?
Yeah, and for me, I think just at uni, I was doing a more general science degree and came across the hydrogeology subject and absolutely loved it and just went from there.
Yeah.
Well, thanks everyone for voting. We've had more than 70% of our audience have voted, and we're just going to have a quick look at the poll results as soon as they come up. What were you expecting people to answer?
Well, I was expecting maybe all of the above, because
we had a bit of that obvious one. Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. All right, I've shared the poll results. Can you see them, Ben? Otherwise, I'll tell everybody how to
Yes, I can see them. The 66 out of 110 said all of the above.
Yippee!
And then a couple of others.
I told you, we've got a switched on audience today.
But yeah, so the answer was all of the above. So now I'm just going to define GDAs before I kind of go through the results a bit, just to make sure we're all on the same page. So I guess a long-winded definition of a GDA is an ecosystem that requires groundwater to meet all or some of the water requirements to maintain the communities of plants and animals, ecological processes, and ecosystem services. So what that basically means is that the ecosystem requires access to groundwater in order to function properly. And so groundwater can supply just a proportion of the total flow, or it can, supply 100% of the water in that ecosystem. Likewise, it can be permanently supplying it, or it can just be intermittently at times when the aquifer levels are higher. Either way, as long as it needs access to groundwater at any given time, it's considered a GDA. So now I'm just going to go through some of the places that were mentioned in the poll. So this is just a screenshot of the GDA Atlas with the satellite imagery sort of shown on the top. So if you wanted to play along at home, that's the link at the bottom. Or the easier option would just be to type in GDA Atlas in Google, and it's the first one to pop up. So it's just it's a web portal that you can just access via your browser. So yeah, this is a screenshot of Kakadu, which is the satellite imagery. And then we turn on the terrestrial GDA layer. And you can see they're graded in different colors based on their potential. So the darker the colour, the higher the potential to be a GDA. Eloise is going to elaborate a bit further on that in her portion of the webinar. And so you can see, more to the southeast, we've got some higher potential GDAs. So it's a lot of sort of riparian vegetation, melaleucas, eucalyptus, different vegetation that's accessing the groundwater via its root. And also you've got those sort of watering holes and that sort of thing that are quite popular with tourists. So the second one, this is the one that we expected to generate some controversy because it's dry most of the time. So I've just turned on the GDA layer now for Kadifanda Lake Eyre. So you can see in the middle of Lake Eyre, we've got a couple of pockets of known GDAs, and what these are actually wetlands or springs that are coming up from the underlying Great Artesian Basin that's actually coming up into the surface. And so they've actually been mapped. The extent of how much of a refuge they supply for ecological system during those dry periods is up for debate, but they are there. And also it's been shown that the bed of Lake Eyre is saturated sediment even when it's dry. So there's a bit of a shallow alluvial aquifer underneath, which is still keeping those sediments saturated. So that's sort of why it's classified as a GDA. And then the third one was the Murray River. So obviously the lifeblood of a lot of, those kind of communities that dot the Murray River and the agriculture that it supports. And so that's receiving, as part of the Murray-Darling Basin complex, so it's receiving all those groundwater flows from New South Wales coming down to Victoria and then eventually off to South Australia where it exits into the ocean. And so, yeah, you can see here it's a bit of a floodplain area, and it's been assessed as a high potential GDA. So now I'm just going to talk a bit about why GDAs are important. So we can broadly separate them into three different pillars. So the first one is for cultural reasons. If any of you have ever sort of gone fishing in a lake or camped by a river or anything like that, chances are you've interacted with a GDA for recreational purposes. And GDAs also, a number of GDAs are sites of cultural significance for the Indigenous population. So things such as Catherine River that supplies water to a number of important GDAs that are important to the Indigenous communities. The second is ecological. So they can provide a number of services such as purifying water and degrading pollutants. They can mitigate the effects of flooding. It can reduce soil erosion and sediment and nutrient loss. And it also provides a habitat for flora and fauna, a number of which might be critically endangered. So it's vital that we preserve those habitats in order for them to sort of continue to survive. And then the third one is, bring it up, economic. So it provides water for plant and animal production. So I gave the example of the Murray River. I think we can all agree that's a pretty important resource, and it supports a lot of the agriculture in that region. And so our economy is quite reliant on preserving GDAs. It also provides tourism opportunities. The example they gave was Kakadu and Lake Eyre. And, you think of all the tourism dollars that brings in, because they're quite world-renowned tourism sites. And it also provides water for human consumption as well. So with that in mind, we need to be considering GDAs in a number of different areas. So whenever we make water planning decisions such as allocating environmental flows or making surface water diversion, we really need to consider, if we remove that water from the system, what will be the impacts on the GDAs downstream? And also for environmental impact assessment, whenever you're developing a large-scale project such as a big mine or, a large development, environmental impact assessments are required because that can really help us ascertain what GDAs are at or near the site, what the potential impacts of the development might be, and also how we could best mitigate the potential impacts. And then the third one is research. So there's actually quite a lot of research happening in GDAs at the moment. Our understanding of GDAs is evolving rapidly. Our method for collecting data on GDAs is becoming much more sophisticated. We're using a lot more satellite imagery, remote sensing, that kind of thing as well. So we're able to capture GDAs across larger areas much more economically. And so the GDA Atlas provides a really great resource for the area of research for people sort of doing work in that space. So I think now I'm going to hand it over to Eloise to introduce our second poll.
Yep, thank you, Ben. Okay, so it's time for our second poll, and this time we want to find out about you, our audience. So the question is, what sector do you work in? And there are a couple of different options. So A, government, B, consulting or private industry, C, research, D, agriculture, or E, other. And you can let us know what sector that is in the chat window. So it should be interesting to see who's tuning in today and what sectors people come from, and also if it's similar to what we currently know about the people who use the GDA Atlas.
What do you currently know about the people that use the GDA Atlas?
So we get quite a few emails from people who use the GDA Atlas, and we've been keeping some statistics about what industry and what sector people come from. And so what we know is about 40% of the users come from consulting or private industry, so sort of engineering or environmental consultancies or mining. I think about 35% come from government, and that's all levels of government, from local government, regional, state, and the Australian government. And then about 15% come from research, based at universities and places like Eyre. And then the remaining 10% came from people like the general public, maybe some farmers, people in those industries.
We've had a couple of answers from a not-for-profit conservation organisation. We've had a consultant, and we've had a natural resource management organisation, and also sector land care. So they're people that I'm not sure whether you were able to vote in the poll or you're telling us separately.
It says other, let us know in the chat.
This is
education.
This is the other bits, all right. So, and Johan's from education. That's awesome.
Yeah, no, that's good. I was hoping today that we'd start to target some other sectors and really broaden our audience.
There's also a NRM from Marianne, who has also sent through a question. So while we're waiting for some answers to come in, I'll just ask our first question. Marianne says, I work in the WA rangelands, arid and semi-arid ecosystems. Do you know how many GDEs out this way that aren't primarily along the WA coast? Or do you know how many? Do you know many GDEs out this way that aren't along the WA coast?
Oh, that's a really tough one. Unfortunately, I'd have to have a look at the GDA Atlas and zoom into the areas she's talking at to have a bit of an investigation. But also the other thing is we do work very closely with the state governments, and so it might be good for her to talk to, I think it's Department of Water and Environmental Regulation in WA, because they do a lot of GDA mapping work for their jurisdiction as well.
Interesting. Well, maybe once we've gone through how it works in the case study, she will be able to go in herself and look at how many GDEs there are not on the coast.
We also have Nikki from the Grape and Wine Association. Catherine's telling us, although I ticked government, I work in the infrastructure delivery sector, quite different. We don't do policy, regulation and planning. Sue's from community advocacy, and Susan says there's 3 of us signing in from Central Highlands Water, Essential Services Water. So that's awesome. Thanks. Thank you everyone for your input. We might close the poll now, see how we go. Oh, we've still got a few more people submitting. Any questions today, please make sure you send them through on our chat function and we will get to them when we can.
Right, so we're just waiting for the
poll to close off.
The poll, and
we'll look at the results. Who do you think is going to be your biggest audience?
Consulting or government, maybe. That's my feeling.
I think you've got a very good instinct. Ms. Eloise, can you see our poll results now?
So 48 of the participants come from government, so that's the top response, followed by consulting, which is 29, and then 6 in research, 4 in agriculture, and 9 other. So that's quite, quite a spread of different sectors. So it's, welcome to everyone to our webinar. Yeah. Excellent. So now I'm going to take you through the second part of the webinar. I'm going to introduce you to the GDE Atlas. I'll tell you what it is, what GDEs are included in the Atlas, and explain how the GDEs are mapped. So the GDE Atlas is part of the Bureau's Groundwater Information Suite. This is a collection of 4 freely available national groundwater data products that are on the Bureau's website. So they include the Groundwater Insight, the Groundwater Explorer, and the National Groundwater Information System. And my colleague John Sharples and I gave a webinar on these products back in June, and that's now available on the Bureau's YouTube page. So please take a listen if you want to find out more.
And the webinar page on the website.
Ah, very good. Yeah. I should point out that there's a URL down the bottom there to get you to the Groundwater Information Suite page. So that's www.bom.gov.au/water/groundwater. But for today, we'll be focusing on the GDE Atlas. So the GDE Atlas is Australia's only national inventory of GDEs. And to our knowledge, it is the only national inventory in the world, or perhaps maybe one of the only national inventories in the world. So I guess if other people know of other products that are out there, we'd really like to hear about it. So that'd be great. So the GDE Atlas provides the location and the characteristics of GDEs, and you can see a screenshot there of the GDE Atlas on the slide. So it's available as a web mapping portal, and it's on the Bureau's website, and it's freely available. So it's typically used by water planners and environmental managers, as Ben was explaining, and it's particularly used in the early stages of projects to flag potential GDEs. And then proponents often do field work and do their own study in greater detail. Okay, so 3 types of GDEs are included on the Atlas. There are aquatic, terrestrial, and subterranean. And if you have a look at the landscape diagram on the slide, you can see a summary of all the different GDEs that are included. So the first type is Aquatic GDS. So these are GDEs that are reliant on the surface expression of groundwater. That means that the groundwater discharges at the surface into features like springs and lakes, wetlands and rivers. And the GDE Atlas has a national coverage of this type of data set. And you can see a screenshot there on the screen. And we've got a lovely picture there showing you an example GDA. That's one of the Great Artesian Basin mound springs. And if we go back to that landscape diagram, you can see examples of some of these GDAs. So you have the lacustrine GDAs, riverine GDAs, palestrine, and riverine wetlands. The second type of GDA are terrestrial GDAs. So these are the ones that are reliant on the subsurface presence of groundwater. So these are things like vegetation, where their roots access the groundwater. And the GDE Atlas has almost national coverage of this type of GDA. We're just missing parts of southern Northern Territory and northwestern New South Wales. But we'd really like to improve that coverage in the future. And you can see an example of some of these types of GDAs from the Geel Nature Reserve in Western Australia, where you have the melaleucas with their roots accessing the groundwater. And if we go back to the landscape diagram, you can see some examples of riverine vegetation reliant on groundwater, as well as other sorts of vegetation elsewhere in the landscape. And then the third type of GDE are subterranean GDEs. So this is where you have an ecosystem occurring beneath the Earth's surface. So this includes things like caves and aquifers. And at the moment in the Atlas, we only have cave GDEs for Queensland and Tasmania, but this is something that we'd like to improve the coverage of in the future. And you can see there on the screen we've got a nice example of a GDE. It's the Mole Creek Cave System in Tasmania, a nice limestone cave environment. And if we go back to the landscape diagram, you can see an example of the cave GDEs, which provide a habitat for the stygofauna, the microorganisms that inhabit those environments. The troglofauna when they're in caves, and in the aquifer environments, they're called stygofauna. Okay, so now it's time for our third poll, and the question is, how many GDE features are included in the GDE Atlas? So the options here are A, less than 200,000, B, 200,000 to 1.5 million, C, 1.5 million to 3.5 million, or D, greater than 3.5 million. Yeah, so
3.5 million
sounds like a lot of GDEs, doesn't it?
A lot of GDEs.
Yeah.
Or GDE, are they the features or the GDEs?
They're features.
The features. Okay.
Yeah. So I guess the thing to point out is this includes all three types of GDEs. So that's the aquatic, the terrestrial, and the subterranean ones. And maybe I gave you some clues by showing you the coverage. Yep.
Yep. While we're waiting for everyone to put in their answers, we've had a few questions come through. One is from Fleur, who is actively working on groundwater quality in GDEs across the country.
Yep.
Is there a one-stop shop?
Oh, for groundwater
quality in
so
GDEs.
The GDA Atlas does include some salinity data, but it is quite limited at this stage. One of our other products that I just sort of briefly showed, the Groundwater Explorer, does have information about groundwater chemistry. Mostly salinity information, but other types of chemistry as well that we have got from Geoscience Australia. And sort of next calendar year, we're looking at adding a whole lot more groundwater chemistry to that product through a collaboration we're doing with Eyre. So I'd say those would be your main sources of chemistry information.
Great, thanks. And we have another question from Dennis. How will different jurisdictional criteria and mapping methods be reconciled?
Yeah, now that's a tough one.
That's a good question, isn't it?
It absolutely is, because that's really what we do at the Bureau. We, and I'm going to cover this, I guess, later on when I talk about how GDEs are mapped, is that we bring together the data sets, the mapping that's done by different jurisdictions, and standardise it and put it in the Atlas. And we try to provide metadata that makes it very clear about where the data's come from, what the method that was used to map it is. So yeah, that's how we sort of deal with those issues.
We'll talk about it more. And I think this one from Patrick, I think might be similar.
Yeah.
Why do the GDE maps show GDE differences for systems that cross state boundaries? So
and that's
you're going to cover that.
Thing. Yeah. So you do, when you look at the spatial, when you look at the maps, you do see some state borders in there that obviously aren't sort of environmental features.
Yeah.
They're just sort of artefacts of having obtained the mapping from different agencies. But it's definitely something we'd like to overcome in the future.
Oh, great. And we will just take one more question while we're putting in some poll answers. From Tao. Please explain the level of confidence, e.g. high and low potential. What do they mean and how did you get them?
Yes.
Or is that also being covered
Well,
soon?
it does. maybe I should hold up, because I'm going to be talking about the GDU mapping in a moment.
Okay.
And I will cover briefly on the potential, but maybe I can add a bit extra for time to answer this question.
Yeah, so maybe we'll see, hear a bit more about high and low potential. And I guess if any questions are not covered or you don't get a full answer in the webinar today, there is an inbox, is that right?
Yeah, so we have a groundwater email address, groundwater@bom.gov.au, and we'd love to hear from you. Oh, and it looks like we have the results here from the quiz. Oh, and it looks like there's quite an equal spread in terms of the answers. So not many people have gone for A, less than 200,000, but it seems that the last three options have been equally as popular. So 200,000 to 1.5 million, 1.5 million to 3.5 million, and greater than 3.5 million. And now I think we'll reveal the correct answer. It was, there's a bit of a typo there. So what it should actually say is more than 3.5 million. So heaps of GDA features in the GDA Atlas. So congratulations to the 21 listeners who chose the right answer. Okay, so now I'll get on to how GDAs are mapped. So as we were sort of alluding to before, GDAs are mapped using many different methods, but they fit roughly into two different groups or sources of information. So the first one is GDAs that have been mapped using the National Assessment. So this was a project that was done from 2010 to 2012, and it mapped potential GDAs. So these are GDAs where we've used desktop methods to predict the location of the GDAs, but haven't confirmed it with field mapping. And so in the National Assessment, Australia was broken up into 8 eco-hydrogeological zones. And the idea was that within each of these zones, they had a similar climate, a similar hydrogeology, and similar ecology. And so there were similar processes controlling the location of GDAs, and their presence could be predicted using the same set of rules. So then GIS data sets were collected to allow us to map these rules and therefore come up with the location of the GDAs as well as the potential. So each of these rules was thought to predict not just whether the GDA, whether features were GDAs, but whether they had a high potential or a low potential or a medium potential to be a TDA. Some of the rules were a greater predictor. So, for example, one of the rules might be that in a region, a particular Banksia species might be a GDA where the water tables are shallow. So then we would get data sets showing the distribution of Banksia species and the location of shallow water tables, overlay those two, and then that would be used to identify potential GDAs. And I should mention that there's a report on this work available from the Bureau website, and the hyperlink's given on the slide there. Okay, so the second type of method is data that's been sourced from regional studies. So this is GDA mapping that's been done by state and territory agencies. And this has mapped both potential GDAs and known GDAs. So the known GDAs have been mapped using fieldwork, whereas the potential ones have been mapped using desktop analysis. So things like using satellite imagery and other rules-based approaches. And you can see I've got a screenshot there on the slides that shows you the location of some of these regional studies. And the other thing to point out is that we maintain a very close relationship with the data custodians. We rely on them to help us put their data into the Atlas very accurately. And so we have a GDA reference group with these data custodians on board, so that we maintain this good relationship, and it ensures that their GDA data gets put into the Atlas correctly.
Thanks, Eloise. I think we've got a Q&A session at the moment before we go into our case study. We've had a couple more questions come through. Well, one question/comment from Dave says, in WA there is a large amount of subterranean GWE from the Pilbara area from the mining industry. You may want to follow this up.
Yes, and that's a very good point. So we actually have started conversations with some of the mining companies in WA. I mean, it's early days, but it does sound like they have a real wealth of data. And so if we could try and get that into the Atlas, but again, collaborating with the state agency in that jurisdiction, it would be a great addition to the Atlas, definitely.
And thanks, Dave, if you're in WA, for joining us so early. I hope you've got your coffee at 8:30 in the morning.
And the second one's similar, actually. It's about data inflow into the Atlas. How long does it take for GDE data collected by private industry, i.e. mining and agricultural business, and submitted to government as part of their EIA and approval process to then get into the GDE Atlas?
Well,
it's a complex question, but how long does it take, I guess? So,
Well, unfortunately, there currently isn't that mechanism, to be honest. The data that's collected by, mining companies and private industry, it often is sort of trapped in those reports and doesn't actually make its way into, some sort of centralised repository in order to get into the GDA Atlas. And this is something that we recognise is, a huge source of great data, and we really want to put it into the Atlas in the future. So we're aware of it, and we're trying to scope out how we can make that happen. But at the moment, so the data sets we do get are more sort of the GDU mapping that's done by the state and territory governments themselves, so sort of larger scale information.
Cool, thanks. Another data question is, well, this is an offer. We have some recent water quality data in our local GDEs. Can this be added to your data set? So that's from Fleur Bound. I can't remember, she said where she worked, but might be someone to get in touch with.
I would suggest sending an email to groundwater@bom.gov.au, where we'd have to look at how we could get that into the Atlas.
She's at Southeast Water.
Southeast Water. But it's definitely worth doing a bit of an investigation and seeing what's possible.
Great. And we have one more question, then we might move on to our case study, but we will follow them up after the webinar if we can't answer them all. Is from, have you quantified the degree of spatial overlap between different types of GDEs?
Oh, no, we haven't. No, we haven't. That's not something we've really looked into. Potentially, we could start to look at that, but no, it's not something we've done to date.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. So we might move on now back to Ben. Can you run us through a case study of an example of what someone can do with this Atlas?
Sure, I'd love to. Okay, so I'm just doing a bit of a generic kind of case study, just showing if you were to do a GDA assessment, just how the Atlas could help you with that. So some possible scenarios could be, installing a new bore field somewhere, installing a new mine, deciding on surface water diversions and environmental flows, that kind of thing. So this is, a screenshot of the GDA Atlas. So as I said, it's a web portal that you can access in your browser. So at the top, you have all the tools to sort of do your analysis and zoom in and out and get information and select features, that kind of thing. To the left, you have all the different layers. As you can see, we have quite a lot of different layers that you can add and look at. And below that, it's not in the screenshot, but there's also a legend and also the sort of download function as well. So the first thing I'm going to do is just zoom into the site. So you see I've highlighted that sort of magnifying glass icon. So we're just in a bit closer. And so one of the first things you might want to know when you're looking at a site is just sort of what is there. So we have a whole bunch of information. We've got water management information, hydrology, surface geology, groundwater flow systems, as well as contextual information such as elevation, land use, bioregion, vegetation. So just for this one, I'm just going to turn on the rivers, the bores, and the land use, just to see, what's at the site. So you can see in the legend that for the land use, it's in an area that's conservation and natural environment. So that may mean there's restrictions on what you could do there, that kind of thing. And also you can see there's one bore, a stock and domestic bore to the south of the site, and then there's also a couple, to the north. You might want to measure the distance of those bores. If you worked out what would your impact on groundwater levels be, you would be able to ascertain perhaps at a certain distance whether you would affect that bore. So I've just highlighted that ruler tool, which allows us to measure distances from your specified location. So that bore is 7.8 kilometers from the site. The next thing I'm going to do now is actually turn on the GDA layers, which are to the top left. So as Eloise mentioned, they're divided into aquatic, terrestrial, and subterranean. At this site, we only have aquatic and terrestrial GDAs. So I've just turned on the Aquatic JDA layer now. And so I'll just quickly go through the legend. So as Eloise mentioned, they're kind of classified based on their potential. So if it's a darker color, that means it's a higher potential to be a GDA. And then we've also split out whether it was from a regional study or from the national assessment. So if it's in shades of purple, that means it's a regional study. Shades of blue means it's a national assessment. And so you can see from this, this image here, to the northwest, I should say northeast, we've got some high potential GDAs from that river system that sort of run through the site. And then to the southwest, orientation's not my strong point. So to the southwest, we've got a lagoon there that's being classified as a low potential GDA. So there are, some GDAs on the site. Now I'm just going to also look at the terrestrial GDAs as well. And so there's actually been a regional study that's taken place at the site, and it's all being classified as known GDAs here. So now that we know that, yes, there are GDAs on the site, we might want to find out a little bit more information about them. So we can use this GDA kind of discovery tool. And if we click on that, so you can see it at the top, if we click on that, it'll bring up some key information about the GDA. So the name of it is Red Lily Lagoon, and the ecosystem type is riparian vegetation. And then you might want additional information that you can download and do your own sort of offline analysis on. So to do that, we just select that select a tool, which is that circle icon that I just highlighted. And then it brings up all the results at the bottom of the screen. And so you can see 27 results have been selected. And then again, that just provides a little bit more information. So the supplied ecosystem types that was, collected by the jurisdiction, the potential and the other things that you saw before. We might want some more detailed information about the GDAs. So we just select that detailed results icon. And then it'll provide us again with some more information. So things such as the eco-hydrogeological zone, groundwater management areas, as well as some aquifer properties, things like that. If we want to actually download that data, we can do that. So this export button that you see to the top left of that table, it gives us three options when we select it. we can download data as a HTML, a CSV, or an Excel file. So I'm just downloading it as a CSV, and this is what you get. So again, it's got that information, the inflow dependence, ecosystem likelihood, which I'm going to touch on a bit later, the river region, the groundwater management area, and also just some basic information about the aquifer that's supplying that GDA. So in this case, it's the Cambrian limestone aquifer. So now I'm just going back to the home page, and I'm selecting the map download tool. So this is actually a really kind of nifty tool. So I've just highlighted it at the top, is that arrow in a box. And what this does is it allows you to download it as a map that you can then include in your, GDA assessments or reporting or impact assessments, that sort of thing. So you can just name it whatever you want, and then you get this map here, which has all the cartographic features you would expect on a map. So it's got the legends, north arrow, scale bar, that kind of thing. So it's just a tailor-made map ready for your reporting, which can be really handy. So the next thing that we're going to do is actually download it as spatial data, because we know that a lot of you like to overlay your own sort of layers and data sets, to kind of see how they interact with each other. So you just go to that selectable, that expandable panel to the left, which is download. And we provide data by river region, purely because we have so much data on there that if we offered by the state, it would just crash and it's just the file sizes are too large. If you did want additional data or more coverage, you can get in touch with us at groundwater@bom.gov.au, and we'll certainly help you out and provide that additional information that you need. So you are able to download the spatial data in 3 different formats. We've got the shapefile, KMLs, or file geodatabase. In this instance, I'm downloading it as a file geodatabase. And so this is what you get here. This is just a screenshot in ArcGIS. And so again, that's got all the data for that river region, as well as for all the fields and different kinds of information, and things such as ecosystem properties, aquifer properties, contextual information. Like, so there's a wealth of information that's provided in that data, and it's all freely available for you to use as you please. So it can be really useful for those wanting to do additional analysis offline. And the last thing I'm going to mention before I hand it back over to Caroline is our inflow dependent ecosystem likelihood grid. So this is a study that was done by CSIRO, or CSIRO. And what inflow dependence refers to is the likelihood of whether anything other than rainfall is supplying water to that ecosystem. So it might be subsurface flow, it could be irrigation, it could be groundwater. And so it was done by looking at satellite imagery during dry periods, and those areas that were still green and obviously still receiving water even without the rainfall, they were kind of classified as having a higher inflow dependence. So it doesn't necessarily mean it's a GDA. It means it's more probable that it could be a GDA, but maybe during the national assessment there might not have been enough data to classify it, that kind of thing. But it's just another, I guess, layer of information that you can use to sort of assess GDA likelihood. And you can see at the site, it's actually quite high inflow dependence as well. So yeah, you're looking at a site that's got a few GDAs on it. So yeah, that's just the end of my case study. If you have any questions or want anything further, just, write it in the chat. But yeah, I'll just hand it over to Caroline for some Q&A.
Thanks, Ben. Actually, we had a Q during that, which was you answered from Dave, can a person get the actual GDA data from BOM and use it in their own GIS system, EDQ GIS, which, yes, you can. A few other questions we have is there a resource available that provides details on the rules that we use to develop the mapping?
Yeah, so that report that I showed on the methodology slide, that talks about the national assessment and the rules that were part of that. The data that's come through the regional studies has come through quite a few different data sets. So there's a range of different rules and methods, but typically we've got some metadata fields that are part of the data set, and where available there's a hyperlink to sort of reports that are relevant to that particular GDA. And also in the future, well, by the end of this financial year, we'd like to provide a lot more documentation on the site about the GDA data set.
Thanks. Another question from Sue. Does any potential dependency on the GDE trigger a statutory requirement for environmental impact assessment?
Oh,
yes.
That would be relevant to the local jurisdiction, I imagine. Like each state would have their own to how you manage a GDE, or
nothing
from this product would then go off and trigger a
No, it more works the other way. If people are doing a development that would trigger it, they might look at the GDA Atlas, the data that would help them make an assessment. But having said that, we're starting to do a lot more work trying to understand what GDE legislation is relevant to every state. We're doing this through our GDE reference group, and so we're going to collate information about all the GDE legislation and see how the GDE Atlas can help to inform those. Yeah.
Sounds great. Another question from Catherine. Can you turn off the national assessments because I assume the scale is not appropriate for project level decision making?
You can't, but I think that would be a really good feature to add in, is because at the moment you can only turn on and off data sets. You can't turn on and off the different types of features according to the classification.
Yeah.
And I think that would be something that would be very useful.
I just want to, if you did want to sort of filter it out, you could download the data and look at it in GIS, and it is possible to filter out just for regional studies, if you wanted to just rely on that, but not within the Atlas itself currently.
Yeah, but having said that, it's still good, if they're doing a regional scale, local scale study, to have access to that national assessment data, especially when no other data is available.
Yeah, that's true. And a question from me following up on that is, given your groundwater at BOM.gov.au, do you take stakeholder feedback and add new features if they want to send it through?
Absolutely. We love to hear people's feedback because that's what we use to decide how to make improvements to the site, and we really listen to that feedback, and that's how we make changes to it. And I might also point out one new feature where we'll be adding in the future, and that's something that has come as a result of user feedback, is we're looking at making the data available as web services, so people can connect directly to the data sets with their own GIS systems. So that should be available by the end of the financial year. Stay tuned. I think that'll,
great.
Very exciting.
Yeah, it is exciting. We have a comment from Isabel firstly. This webinar is great.
Oh, thank you.
But also a question, from the data available, are we able to determine which rough direction the groundwater is flowing?
Oh, not from the data that's available, but we have started to, at our most recent GDU reference group meeting, we had a workshop about water table mapping data and how we could incorporate that into the GDA Atlas, because that's the sort of data you would need to make an assessment on which direction the groundwater is flowing in. Mm-hmm. So we recognise that that's a really important data set, and we're just sort of trying to scope out how we could potentially get that data into the Atlas.
Yeah, sounds good. Speaking of data into the Atlas, how frequently is the GDE database updated? Is the question we've got from you.
Yeah. So, well, that's a bit of a hard one. So initially, as we had the national assessment back in 2010 to 2012, then we've done one major update, which occurred about, 2 years ago now? And now we're currently doing another update. But we're hoping that it will become almost an annual process if we can get to a stage where we've streamlined the delivery of data from state agencies and made it much easier to incorporate the data into our system, then yeah, we'd like to do it on an annual basis just so it's up to date and consistent with the data sets that other agencies have.
Sounds good. Now we've got quite a few more questions coming through. We've probably got time to take a few more before we summarise and close the webinar. But another is, in the example given of placing a bore or a mine, is there a way to quantify the likelihood that a given development could be spatially related to a given GDE?
I think that would have to be done like through additional analysis.
Additional mapping.
Yeah, like you might need to do some actual hydrogeological modelling and work out what your changes in water level will be, that kind of thing. But within the atlas itself, no, I don't think you could really spatial. It's just as a complementary data set to how, you know,
so that might be a case that you export the data into something else and do some.
Yeah, because I mean, honestly, I don't think you couldn't do an assessment just completely on its own with the GDA Atlas. You need to do it in conjunction with other data as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Input. A question from Jed. What sort of ground truthing studies would be recommended to confirm a mapped potential GDE as a known GDE?
Yeah. So, I mean, it depends on the type of GDE you're talking about. And for some of the state agency data sets, they have done field verification of some of their mapping. So for New South Wales, for example, they've mapped terrestrial GDAs almost across the entire state, and they've done some ground truthing at various sites. Yeah, but the type of ground truthing, I think, depends on the type of GDE you're talking about.
Okay.
So you can do things like looking at the chemistry, looking at the water levels, actually just observing fields, observing springs in the field. Yeah, there's a whole range of approaches.
Yeah. Sounds like it might, if you want more information, a good one to email in.
Absolutely.
One last question before we summarise and wrap up the webinar. Can I ask if the database differentiates which aquifers the GDEs depend on water from? Water table versus deeper?
Yeah, we do have a field about the source aquifer, but it's probably mostly incomplete. It's maybe more of an aspirational thing. We'd like to see it a bit more filled in, but it's probably, it's not as full as we would like.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. So, like Ben said, we'd like to see it populated more in the future, and I guess it's one of our priorities for filling in for the Atlas, so hopefully in the future.
Yeah.
Data will be there.
Which is great. It sounds like there's a lot of keen interest in what you've currently got and some new features. If we haven't managed to get to your question, I know there's a few more there, but we'll ask our presenters to follow up with you after the webinar. But I'll hand back to Ben to summarise in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, okay, I'll do it very quickly. So just a brief summary. I guess the things we covered. So GDEs, they're ecosystems that require access to groundwater. They can be aquatic, terrestrial, or subsurface, and they're things such as vegetation that accesses groundwater, springs, lakes, rivers, wetlands, as well as caves and aquifers. And the GDA Atlas is a national inventory of GDA data that is freely available to the public. And it was mapped from both a national assessment and gets regional updates as they come to hand. And the GDA Atlas is useful for water planning decisions, environmental impact assessment, and also for research. And so finally, if you do want a bit more information, we do have a groundwater newsletter that we send out maybe 2 or 3 times a year, so you won't be spammed if you signed up to it. But if you go to that link, bom.is/enviro-news, it provides a list of different Bureau products that you can sign up to, and one of them is groundwater. So do sign up to that and anything else you might be interested in. And the other groundwater products are available at bom.gov.au/water/groundwater. And finally, if you have any more questions or some feedback for us, we always love to hear from you. So please get in touch with us at groundwater@bom.gov.au. And the very last thing, we also have a blog on the GDA page about the GDA Atlas, which is kind of a nice 2-3 minute sort of video explaining GDAs. So do check that out as well.
And that brings us to the end of our webinar today. Thank you, Ben and Eloise, for joining us in the studio. We are grateful you could share your knowledge with us. Very interesting and informative. To our audience, thank you for tuning in today. We hope you enjoyed the session, and we do hope you'll join us again next time. If you're enjoying BOM webinars, don't forget to subscribe to receive information on upcoming webinars, watch webinars on demand via the Bureau's YouTube channel, and engage with us on social media using #BOMWebinars. Our next webinar will be on Thursday the 6th of December, giving some insight into the climate and water outlook for summer. Register now if you want to join us again. Finally, but most importantly, we want your feedback. It is our aim to bring you the highest possible quality webinars, but we can't do that unless you share your experiences with us. Once we close this webinar, a short survey will pop up on your screen, and we'd be very grateful if you could complete it for us. Once again, thank you for your time, and we look forward to seeing you again. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for joining us.